Lawmakers in Texas will hold hearings Thursday to get answers on the state's power grid failure. Over 4 million people were left in the dark during last week's deadly winter storm. 5 board members of ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which manages and operates the state's independent grid, have since resigned. A 6th withdrew his application to the board. President Biden will meet with local leaders in Houston Friday. New reporting by the Texas Tribune is highlighting the environmental impact of the outages. According to the report, oil refineries, chemical manufacturers, and petrochemical plants warned state regulators they may have released millions of pounds of pollutants and greenhouse gases into the air during the power failures. For more on this, let's bring in environment reporter for the Texas Tribune, Erin Douglas. Erin, thanks very much for being with us. We'll discuss the environmental impact report in a moment, but first tell us, who were these ERCOT members and how did their resignations come about?
Right. So thank you so much for having me. So the ERCOT board members who resigned, they were members who were unaffiliated board directors to ERCOT, in addition to a couple other board members that resigned, and all of them lived out of state. And so these members had come under criticism early last week during the crisis when it was initially reported that some of the members on the ERCOT board, which is an independent nonprofit that operates Texas's power grid, didn't live in the state. And so it is important to note that these independent members, they are appointed to these positions because they don't have any affiliation to anything that ERCOT manages. So that is potentially partially a reason why they might have been living out of state, but it did create bad optics and they ended up resigning because of that.
Well, Governor Abbott has pinned the state's power grid failures on ERCOT and even renewable energy sources. What kind of political fallout is the governor facing?
Yeah, so Abbott is the governor, and he's facing a lot of criticism in the aftermath of this crisis. I mean, he appoints the Public Utility Commission, which is the governmental body that oversees ERCOT. And so those appointments are on his shoulders, and he will also face criticism, particularly in the aftermath of sort of pointing the blame at renewable energy. And, you know, I was on ERCOT's board meeting today, and time and again, they have said all energy sources faced troubling circumstances during this storm, and no one source is to blame, except in particular, natural gas faced a lot of difficulties getting their plants running during this storm. So if anything, natural gas is perhaps the biggest culprit here. And so that'll be likely a criticism of the governor in his reaction to this.
Well, Erin, I want to talk about that pollution report. Industrial plants typically shut down ahead of big weather events. How did Texas handle it? And what was the impact on pollution released into the air?
Yeah, so the thing is that oil refineries, chemical plants, these facilities often shut down ahead of storms in order to avoid worker safety problems, avoid more spills, avoid more pollution. But the thing is that that does create excess emissions, especially in areas where there are a lot of these plants located. One of the problems in Texas is that several of the state regulators' air quality emission monitors also went down during the storm. And so we don't necessarily have the air monitoring data from that event as comprehensively as maybe we would have liked.
Well, what do we know, though, typically, who is most affected by this kind of pollution?
Yeah, so research shows that Black communities, Hispanic communities definitely bear the burden of these sorts of emission events, and that is because of long-standing government-imposed segregation that has had effects throughout generation after generation and creates a lot of these plants being located nearby communities of color. I have cited again and again a study from researchers showing that Black and Hispanic communities are typically exposed to 50% more air pollution than they generate. Contrast that to white communities that typically emit, that are exposed to 17% less emission than they generate.
That's a huge disparity. Well, in a deregulated environment like Texas's energy system, consumers benefit when everything is running as planned. Conversely, though, in an unexpected event, they end up paying a lot more. Erin, is there any talk of upgrading the grid or changing who runs it?
Yeah, so all of the talk right now is around winterizing Texas's electricity infrastructure. And so that would entail stuff like making sure that the wellheads at natural gas production plants don't freeze, or making sure that we can transport that natural gas to the plants that need it in order to operate, and then making sure the plants themselves aren't freezing. And so the problem here is that these plants didn't invest in this infrastructure ahead of time. And now what Texas will have to do is sort of retrofit a lot of this equipment, go back and try to make sure that we're prepared for an event like this in the future. Another major problem that was just mentioned on the ERCOT board meeting today is that one of the big problems was that these outages that ERCOT implemented weren't effectively able to roll. So what you would normally want is for them to switch to different customers, but we didn't have enough leeway for the transmission utilities to be able to do that, which created these long-run outages where people lost power for days on end. So that's definitely something that ERCOT and legislators are going to look at, is how do we make sure that we're going to be able to spread around the outages if we do ever have to do outages again.
I imagine a number of lessons learned after what happened. Erin Douglas for us. Erin, thank you.
Thank you.